welcome to the Art of Being Human. We're dealing with issues of emotions and self-concept and how they intertwine and what's good and what's not good and what's healthy and what's not healthy. I picked up, in terms of preparing for these classes, I picked up a quote. I'm going to read it. It's written by David Wolfe, and I probably picked it up on the internet, but I don't know for sure. I probably picked it up on Facebook, but it illustrates the fact that you believe you are a certain way. You are what you believe you are, in other words. So let me just read this off. I'm not going to spend much time with it, but this is what it says. You are the books you read, the movies you watch, the music you listen to, the people you spend time with, the conversations that you involve yourself with. Choose wisely what you feed your mind. Let me read it again. You are the books you read, the movies you watch, the music you listen to, the people you spend time with, the conversations that you're involved with. Choose wisely what you feed your mind. It's what you feed your mind that forms an image in your mind as to who you are. And it's just the way it is. If I fill my mind with thoughts that I'm no good, I don't have a chance, I'll never make the big time, and all of this, then I just think about, well, why not me? I should be better. I'm not good enough, and all of that. If I feed my mind with, I'm doing well, considering my age, considering what I've done, I was a college professor, I've done well, I've written books, so forth, then I can think and say, well, you know, this isn't bad, I've done well in my life. And then my self-concept changes. You are what you believe. You are what you perceive. And so therefore, perception becomes a very important thing because it defines who you are according to yourself. What you believe you are, that's what you are to you, and that's your truth. Now, something could change, and that's your inner reality. Something can change, and you can decide that you're something different, or you can improve yourself, or whatever. But the thing is, what you believe you are, that's your internal truth, and that's what you believe. So the brain, in other words, does not know the difference between a real and an imagined thing. If I believe that people are against me, this is my internal truth. I believe it. Now, it may not be true. The brain doesn't know whether it's true or not, but that's what you believe because that's what you fed yourself. And so that can help your personality in terms of being better or worse, depending upon what you're feeding yourself. And that's why I read that quote off to you. If you imagine something is true, then the brain assumes that it is true. The brain can't tell what's true or not true by itself. It's an organ. You punch into it like you punch things into a computer. Well, I think I'm good. Well, I don't think I'm good. I always make mistakes. And the way that children get treated when they're being raised, can't you do anything right? You know, the child has spilled milk for the 10th time that day. Can't you do anything right? Can't you follow directions? I can't sit you down with a glass of milk. You're always going to spill it. You're always going to be this bumblebum. Now, the word bumblebum might not be used in that conversation, but that's what the child hears. What he hears is what you told him. I can't do anything right. How do I know I can't do anything right? My mother just told me, can't you do anything right? Well, the obvious answer is no, I can't, because that's the obvious answer to that question. What if the mother sat him down and said, you know, you're a terrific boy and I love you dearly. You do have a problem in spilling milk, so maybe I should help you with that more. But I really think you're a terrific kid. I love you very much. Then what a change. I'm loved, I'm accepted, I do have a problem, but I'm loved and I'm accepted. I can't be that bad. I knew a lady who I was teaching for a while very close to the Canadian border, and she would punish her children. She was very good with them. When she punished her children, she would say, now you're going to have to go to your room for 5 minutes, or whatever it was. She was very reasonable. And then she'd hug them and say, I really love you. And the children just grew up beautifully. They knew if they made a mistake, they'd have to pay the price, whatever it was. It was very reasonable. She wasn't abusive at all. And then they knew that they were loved. They didn't have any personality problems, but you can wear a person down with negative thoughts, negative concepts, because that becomes and can become verbal abuse. The problem is the child is going to believe it. If you're working at a job and it's like the boss is saying, you don't do this right, I've got to correct you all the time, you begin to feel that you can't do the job. Maybe it's not right for you, or maybe you're just dumb and you can't do it because you're not intelligent enough to do it. We really cut into people's souls when we're negative all the time. And so in my teaching, I've always planned and always tried to be a positive force in a person's life, not a negative one, but a positive one, because a person can't tell the difference because the brain can't tell the difference. So this is a very important thing to learn. If you're dealing with people, praise them wherever you can praise them. Thank them wherever you can thank them. And then they get a better perception of who they are, more realistic because it's a positive one. And then you have a better relationship with them because you can be positive with them. And unless the person is an abuser, most people aren't, some people are, but unless a person is not an abuser, then you can have a good relationship with people. The brain does not know the difference between what's real and what's not real. And we tend to relive past pain. If you're a person who's grown up in a negative environment because you were constantly told you didn't do this right, you didn't do that right, I wish that your brother had gotten the award instead of you, and he's a better person than you, and on it goes. That past pain you relive over and over again as an adult. If you were abused as a child, then as an adult you still feel negative about yourself. If you went into sports and you didn't make the grade but another member of your family did, you start thinking you're not good enough. Why? Well, because that's the way it is. My brother won, I didn't. My sister won, I didn't. And that's the way it is. I know of a real case of two children that were dancers, beautiful dancers as children, and they went into a contest. They didn't think it was going to be any kind of a problem. Well, the boy won, and the girl, who was like maybe a year younger, did not win. She was very good, but she didn't win. And they asked the little boy, you must be so ecstatic that you won. He says, no, I'm very sad. And they said, why would you be sad at winning? He says, because my sister didn't make it. They were close enough, and he was aware of what it would do to his sister not to make it, and he would rather have had her win than him to preserve her somehow. So I don't think it's a good idea to put children of the same family in a competition, because then they don't feel good about themselves if they win. They don't feel good about themselves if they lose. And so therefore, I just don't think it's a good thing to do. We relive the past pain that we have lived with. If it's negative, we've relived that past pain. And as a result of that, we grow up as adults, and that past pain becomes our reality. We experience that past pain all over again when certain situations arise. And that means we become nervous and anxious about things that should long ago have been passed by, you know. If I have a person that I'm counseling and they've had a bad past, certain times will bring it back. Certain situations that remind them of the past abuse will bring all of those feelings back. And so they're reliving that past pain. Part of the healing process is not to have to live that past pain anymore. And in terms of counseling, I zero in on that. Because if their difficulty is they're living something because it happened in the past and it was not resolved in the past, it will forever haunt them at certain times. Maybe not every day, but it will haunt them. And so you have to get back to the past. This is why counselors focus so much on the past, because a lot of the things that are happening, a lot of the things that are very painful are coming in from the past to be relived because they were not resolved when they should have been resolved. Every age group has certain things it deals with, and we're going to get into this at some point, getting into developmental psychology, where we go into the various ages of people, children, young adult, middle-aged adult, elderly adult, all of the stages that children go through into their lives. Every stage that they have has got some kind of a problem that has to be resolved, some kind of a developmental issue that has to be resolved. And if it's not resolved when it should be, then it lingers and lingers and lingers, and every so often it haunts you. It comes back to haunt you because it wasn't resolved. You might not even recognize what it is or where it stems from, but it's there. And then when you get to midlife, you have a very bad midlife crisis. People talk about the midlife crisis. Well, it's real. And what the midlife crisis is composed of is all of those problems and developmental crises that you had in your childhood that were not resolved. They now raise up their heads, and then you have a very bad midlife crisis. It does happen, but not to everybody. The person who is able to resolve the issues of the developmental crises as they are growing in the age that they're in, it doesn't have to haunt them for the rest of their life. They just grow through it and go on. So that's what I really want you to understand that. Now, what about a negative self-concept? What are people like? What do they suffer if they go through a negative self-concept? I'm going into some of this, although I probably won't finish it today. People with a poor self-concept may have been taught that they were not satisfactory. And I bet that a lot of people who feel badly about themselves have been taught as children that they're not good enough. And when we have a poor self-concept, we feel less worth. And we may withdraw into ourselves, and we may not bother with other people, and we may avoid other people because you don't want to be friends with people who think that you're not as good as you should be. That's the concept that a person will have. When people are difficult to get along with, they don't feel secure. Sometimes they're not they're not easy to get along with because they are insecure. Where does that come from? It would come from a negative self-concept. Why does a bully act like a bully? Well, some people are naturally bulliers. They bully other people. A lot of times they don't feel secure and they don't feel very good about themselves, and they're trying to make up for it by being rougher and tougher and meaner than other people. Somehow they think that shows they're superior, they're stronger, but it doesn't. It only shows that they're suffering from something and they're making up for it and behaving in that way. People with a poor self-concept tend to belittle themselves. They're not as good as other people, or so they think. They're not as good as other people, they can't do as much as other people, or they frame their goals according to what other people's goals are, and they can't meet the need, they can't do it. That's because it's not for them. They need to head in another direction. I had a good friend of mine, there was a group of us growing up, and we were all friends, and we all went to college, but this one girl kept flunking out. She just couldn't do it. Now, she tried to get back into college again, readmit herself. She had got readmitted about 3 times. She flunked out every time. She just couldn't do it. Now, we were friends with her. We're not going to give up a friendship, but that was not for her. College just was not for her. It's not for everybody. But she felt she had to be like us. She had to get good grades. She had to go on and get a degree to keep up with us because that's what we were doing. Not everybody has to accomplish the same thing. If there are things you can't do, accept it graciously, because we all have things we can't do. I can't do mathematics very well. I certainly can't run a sprint anymore. Not that I ever could. I can remember when I was young, I would climb a mountain. Oh, it was so much fun. Well, I can't do that anymore. That's long past. But see, I can't define myself according to what I can't do. You should not define yourself according to what you can't do. Define yourself according to what you can do. I counseled a little girl. She had some cognitive issues, and She was adopted. She did all right, but not like her brothers and sisters. And so finally, but she loved to swim. And so she was bemoaning the fact in my office about how she wasn't as good as they were, and they knew so much more, and they did so much better. And I interrupted her, and I says, yeah, but I bet they don't swim like you do. And all of a sudden, she lit up. That's right, she says, I'm a much better swimmer. So we helped her to reconstruct her self-concept on the basis of what she could do, and she was much happier after that. She didn't have to define herself according to somebody else. It's a mistake to define yourself according to what somebody else is. You have to define yourself according to who you are. That means you need to know something about yourself. What are you good at? What do you like? You know, and if you aren't like somebody else, so what? You don't have to be like everybody else. You have to be true to yourself. As long as everything you're doing is a positive moral basis, then be yourself. So this is what you need to think about. So you don't have to be thinking of yourself in combination with what somebody else is doing. People who act like they are knowledgeable and they're important, sometimes they're not as knowledgeable as they seem, but they're doing things in order to be able to prove to themselves that they're better than they are. When I went to college, and I found out that there was a man who used as many difficult words as he could to describe what he was talking about. He had to prove that he was smarter. In fact, I had a college professor who didn't get a PhD. He may have one now, but he didn't get a PhD. And the reason was that he wrote a thesis and it was not accepted. And so therefore he never got the PhD, but he passed his angst down to his students to the point where no one wanted to take classes with him. What he did was he used every big word he could think of. And he made his classes much more difficult than they had to be, much more homework involved, very, very judgmental in terms of what they did. He would tease them because they hadn't written a book yet. He hadn't either, but he had written some journal articles. So therefore he tried to prove to them that he was superior to them, just the way he taught, just the way he was around them. And then I kind of messed him up a little because I published a book. He hadn't done it yet, but one of his students had published a book, and it was me. And I got a lot of attention from it. The campus gave me a lot of attention. I had interviews. It was plastered all over. First graduate student in this department that's ever published a book. Wouldn't you know it was me? Well, after that, he didn't really want to have a whole lot to do with me. I kind of messed him up a bit. But the thing is, he wanted to be superior, and he wanted to be thought of as being superior, but everybody knew what his problem was. He just wasn't able to make the grade. He probably would have in a different school. It may be corrected now, but he had to prove to everybody how important he was and how much smarter he was. And it just doesn't fly. You know, anyone who is a genuine person can catch on to that at some point. But too bad the students had to catch on to it in his classes because his workload was extreme, and it just didn't work out very well. So at any rate, people do try to prove to themselves that they're better than they think they are. It only shows the efforts to have a positive self-concept. People who don't feel good about themselves will likely be arrogant, because they feel they have to prove themselves to be right all the time. And you get a person like that, it's hard to have a relationship with a person who's always right or thinks they're always right. And soon your friendships drop off and you don't have as many friends because people don't want to put up with that, and neither should they have to put up with that. People with a poor self-concept tend to depreciate themselves, or they talk about themselves. You know, it's going to go in one or the other direction. Either they're going to be very arrogant, or they're going to talk about themselves constantly in a negative way. I am not smart enough. I am not successful enough. And people like that who have a negative self-concept try to be perfectionists. Everything has got to be right. Everything has got to be done exactly right. And the problem with that is that there's no room for being a human being. If you're a perfectionist, not only do you expect yourself to be perfect, but you expect everybody else to be perfect. So you're always nitpicking. Oh, you shouldn't have done it this way. You should have done it that way. And on and on and on it goes. And at the point, it gets to the point where people do not want to have a relationship with you if you are that way. You'll never be satisfied with what anybody else does. There's always got to be a correction. You'll never be satisfied with what you do unless you're perfect. Most people aren't perfect. And we have to learn to accept the fact that we're human beings, and that means that we're never going to be perfect. One of my friends had a little girl, 6 years old, and I happened to see them one day, and we were talking, and I says, "You have a beautiful child." She says, "She's not perfect yet because she's only 6. And I wanted to tell her she's never going to be perfect because people aren't. She's doing very well at age 6. Don't expect her to be perfect at the fact that she's 12 because no one's perfect. Let her be who she is. So the whole key to kind of being a success in life, I think, is to accept who you are, the genuine you, and don't try to be like everybody else, and don't try to mimic everybody else, and don't try to be superior to everybody else. Just discover who you are and work with that. Now, we're almost close to time, so I'm going to close it here, and we'll continue with something like this next week. Please join me then.